My Other Face, Chapter 6. With a blue, uncertain, stumbling buzz between the light and me, when the windows failed, and then I could not see to see. Emily Dickinson. Jamie's heart raced as he kept pace with the rented car. He was nearing the bridge that spanned the river to the plant road. The textile factories were behind him now, and the lights of the town glowed in the distance. He could still see, however, the ever-moving hands of the clock tower as they closed in on 8 o'clock. To his left, the icy river waves rolled in the moonlight, and he slowed for the turn to the bridge. A wooden security arm had been opened on the far side, and he was sure that Minos had the situation well in hand. The plant was visible now, much larger than it appeared from the distance. It scared him half to death, but his revenge was stronger and grew with each passing second. He prayed that something did indeed exist under the hydro portion of the plant, and he knew that such a complex would put his father in a no-win situation. He had decided he would attempt to ruin the existing plant if there was nothing below, but that was all hypothetical. His more vivid fantasy involved telling the world that his father was unleashing awesome power without checking all the ramifications. He would make all his findings public, and his father would be through. Minos had also opened up the inner gates, and all seemed clear as Jamie drove up the asphalt road. Up ahead, the parking lot was surrounded by a high chain-link fence, and once again Minos opened the high gates. Jamie felt very confident now as he drove by the gates and slowed the car right at the edge of the shipping room door. He looked at his watch. It was 2 minutes past 8 o'clock. He was almost inside the plant after all the months of research and planning. The metal door began to open electronically, and the light from the inside burst into the car. Minos, a small man in a white coat and a Caesar haircut, stood next to the switch on the inside wall. Jamie pulled the car onto the warehouse cement. The plant was deserted at this hour, as most of the technical people were in other sections of the building. Minos pushed the button and the doors closed. Jamie watched him in the mirror. Then he shut off the car and stepped outside. "Where is everyone?" he wanted to know as he walked over to Minos.
"Nobody's in this area at this time of day. That's why I suggested you come here."
"What about my father? Has he been called or been out here?"
"Don't be nervous," said Minos as he shook his head. "Your father makes a daily inspection of the plant. He made such an inspection this morning at 10 a.m. Now don't be nervous, Jamie. I assure you we are the only ones in this sector of the plant."
"Very well, I'm ready to go, Minos. I want to make this visit short and sweet."
"Then let's go upstairs to the EMR.
Environmental maintenance room."
"You've studied the plans very well. I have, however, programmed the computers and they're ready to go as per instructions," he said as they walked across the warehouse, through the tiers of pallets, toward a set of stairs at the far end of the side room. Jamie moved at a fast clip, sometimes getting ahead of Minos, then slowing down to allow him to catch up. "You certainly are in a hurry."
"Then why the hell shouldn't I be?" asked Jamie as they climbed the steps to the next floor. "I've never done anything like this before in my life. Breaking into a plant? I've studied these plans up and down, Minos, but I still don't know just what lies ahead."
"In any event, you can trace it better on the readout at the screen of the computer," said Minos as they entered a darkened corridor carpeted with a deep red carpet pile. They walked ahead and Minos took out his keys. He unlocked the door marked Environmental Maintenance Room. As he flipped on the overhead fluorescent lights, Jamie quickly closed the outside door and locked it tight. "I don't want to take any chances," he said seriously. Minos seemed to be unaffected by Jamie's apprehension and turned slowly toward the computer screen. He activated the system and a blue background filled the monitor. It took another few moments for him to program the proper sequence into the system. But slowly, the white lines, representing the boundaries of the air ducts, appeared on the screen with solid green areas that designated the outer boundaries of the plant. "Now, Jamie, as you undoubtedly know, these ducts are specifically called number 43 and 87. They end abruptly in the green areas. There's no logical reason why
No reason for them to be constructed right in a solid wall. I understand this.
That is correct. When you step inside, I can activate the infrared readout. This will give me a virtual display of the temperatures within the duct system. If the area gets over 90 degrees, it will show up on the screen as a red area.
Yes, I understand all that. Now get me the walkie-talkie.
Very well, said Minos as he reached under the counter and pulled out the radios, handing one to Jamie.
Let's check this thing out, said Jamie, pushing the red button on the side. All right, get inside the duct. I want to see that red area as well as hear the walkie-talkie.
Sure, I can get inside, replied Minos. He walked casually over to the aluminum grid in the corner of the room. Gently, he pulled back the clips and removed it from his housing. Although he was an older man, Minos still retained some agility. He leaped onto the counter and pulled himself over the duct.
Can you hear me?
Yes, no problem here, but I don't see anything on the screen yet.
I'll go a ways down,
said Minos, and he pushed himself along the duct.
What about now?
Good, very good,
said Jamie. An exact silhouette of Minos' figure appeared on the screen in red, as if observed from above.
Okay, get back here. I'm going in, said Jamie into the walkie-talkie.
Very stuffy in here, Jamie. Perhaps you should bring some water with you. I can get...
I'm going in.
Well, at least let me go over it with you on the screen.
I've gone over it for the last month, Minos. I don't want, he said, hesitating as he unbuttoned and removed his bulky coat. I don't want any complications, he added, and crawled up and onto the counter. He spun around and hoisted himself into the opening as Minos came out. Good luck, said Minos, descending to the floor. Thank you. I'm going to prove that there's something here tonight, and when I come out, my father will be ruined. Everything will be behind me then, and I can start over.
Right.
Goodbye, Minos, he said, and he leaned back. His feet disappeared into the duct. He turned over on his belly and crawled as if he were on combat maneuvers. Minos looked down the duct and then scurried back to the computer screen. He could see the image of Jamie's body as relayed by the heat sensors. Jamie was moving down the duct, but his nervousness was evident in his impetuous pursuit of the underground facility. He had moved close to 100 feet before he spoke to Minos on the walkie-talkie.
How far am I from the large duct?
Not very far, about 20 feet. There will be a baffle plate at the...
I see it. Okay, I'm almost there.
He crawled the remaining few feet and pushed his way through the movable aluminum baffle plate. A sensor sounded at the computer screen, indicating the baffle had changed its position. Jamie stood upright in the larger central duct of the plant. He took out the blueprints, studying them for a short time, and then put them back inside his pocket. He sprinted down the lengthy circular tube. His footsteps echoed loudly, almost to the point where it hurt his ears. Then he passed through another series of baffle plates on both sides of the central duct. Some were open wide with the warm air blowing through, and others were shut tight. All of them had bold black numbers stamped across the aluminum. They were not the numbers he remembered seeing on the blueprints. Minos, can you hear me?
I'm having trouble reading you on the screen.
What? Where the hell do I go from here? He shouted through his heavy breathing.
I cannot tell.
Insisted Minos.
The sensors aren't working like they should be.
Oh, isn't that great? I thought you said this was all set. Can't you even see where I am? He asked as he took out his own plans again.
You should be about 50 feet from the main duct.
Well, I went the wrong way then, damn it. I should have taken the small connecting tunnel back there. Can you see me yet?
No, I'm afraid I cannot see you. You'll have to go it alone.
Oh, come on, Minos. My life is at stake and you've screwed this up. I'm going back to that connecting tunnel that I should have taken to begin with. That looks like the right one, he told Minos as he ran back on the tube. Sweat poured down his face and his white turtleneck jersey was soaked. He felt compelled to run toward his destination, being undeterred by the warm air. It was not unlike a jog on the beach in California, but a jog on the beach was something secure.
There was no one to harm him. Here, he could be in trouble, running toward an unknown factor with 1,000 different possibilities. And as he squeezed into the connecting tunnel, he felt the repressed guilt, piercing doubt into his mind. Was it really all right to topple his father from power? As he pushed his way along the smaller tunnel, he convinced himself that he was right because his father was evil. His father had no right doing things that might disturb the fabric of the universe, nor did he have the right to disturb Jamie's fabric for his own well-being. His father must be brought down. Jamie had thought about that very thing for years. It had to be right. It had to be done. Ahead, the tunnel was ending, and he pulled himself through the baffle plate to a larger duct. "Minos! Minos!" he shouted into the radio. "I'm outside the duct on the riverside," he told him, but there was no answer. "Minos! Minos!"
I can hear you,
said Minos almost nonchalantly, which seemed to anger Jamie all the more. "Just stay next to the walkie-talkie. How far am I from the 87th duct?"
the computer is still not picking up your image.
"Well, then fix the damn thing. I'm going straight in there. According to the blueprints, 87 is 30 yards down the circle. This is all very confusing, Minos. I wish you could direct me."
I cannot help you at this time.
"You fool!" he sneered as he walked ahead. "Why didn't you check this out beforehand?" Once again, Minos did not answer. Jamie wiped the sweat from his brow. He double-checked each of the duct numbers on the baffle plates as he passed under them. Since the ducts were continuously crossing each other, he was able to find the infamous 87th duct and move past the baffle plate into a darkened area lit only by tiny incandescent bulbs every 20 feet. The tunnel was as mysterious as it appeared on the computer, extending some 200 feet beyond the solid green area. It did end, however, at a concrete wall and another baffle plate on the floor. Jamie nudged the plate forward and stared down a ladder on the concrete wall. He very easily could have fallen to his death. "I'm at a ladder that extends well below the plant. Minos! Minos! This is good news."
I cannot see you. I would advise your coming back here at once.
"I'm going ahead," said Jamie, lowering himself onto the ladder. "In fact, I'm on my way now."
I tell you, you're taking a big chance. I can't see you, and this is not good. You could be descending into nowhere.
"That's my problem, isn't it, Minos?" he said as he moved down the rungs. Jamie moved closer to his destination. He paced it out slowly, moving down the rungs methodically and calling out the number of rungs under his breath. The height was astronomical, but he was driven in his state of mind. It meant nothing to him all the way down the ladder, and a few minutes later he stepped onto the floor of another duct. "Minos, I'm at the bottom. The tunnel is narrow, and I'm going ahead," he said, rapping on the walkie-talkie. "Minos! Minos! Can you hear me? Damn you!" The tunnel veered to his right. Jamie started running, sprinting as if he were a runner before a large stadium of onlookers. He had run only 5 or 6 feet when the duct suddenly dipped forward. With no warning, he fell on his stomach, hitting the aluminum with a thud. His head pointed downward, and he was racing in total darkness into the unknown. "Minos! Minos!" he shouted, grasping onto the walkie-talkie. "I'm falling! I'm falling!" Like a spacecraft in Earth orbit, he applied pressure with his arms, slowly turning his position until his feet were pointing downward. He lifted his knees toward his head, getting into a crash position and preparing himself for the worst. He was moving so fast that even the slightest obstruction would severely injure him. He hit the baffle plate as the chute ended, crashing through an aluminum grid into a pitch-black room. Before he knew what had happened, he was sailing through the air, landing on his shoulder. He tumbled over several times, finally sliding across a slick, waxy surface. Amazingly, he still clutched onto the walkie-talkie and zoomed another 20 feet before coming to a stop. His shoulder ached only slightly, but he was dazed for a few seconds until he realized he was outside the realms of the official blueprints of the hydro plant. His eyes adjusted to the darkness, and he thought he saw light, but he couldn't be sure.
He stumbled forward over the smooth floor. It had to lead to somewhere. As Jamie moved forward in the darkness, far beneath the plant, Minos turned from the red image on the computer screen. He smiled as the door to the room opened and James Pendleton I strode inside with his 2 associates.
"Well, good evening, Mr. Pendleton," said Minos as he rose.
"Where is he?"
asked Pendleton as he walked toward the screen. "I tried to stall him, but he went in there anyway. He's all the way below in the sub-room beneath the Terminix."
"We've got him right where we want him. There's absolutely no way out unless we open the elevator."
"He has no idea where he is," boasted Minos with a surly grin. "Your orders, Mr. Pendleton."
"I want to go down there myself,"
said Pendleton as he checked his gun.
"But, Mr. Pendleton,"
persisted his associate Edgar,
"surely we can get a security man to bring him up here with us." "Wrong, Edgar. I want this myself."
He walked over to the computer screen and picked up the walkie-talkie. As they watched his every movement, he left the room and headed down the red carpeted corridor. At the far end was a blue metallic elevator. He opened the door and got inside, and the door closed quickly. The car began its descent, and Pendleton pushed the button on the walkie-talkie. On the other end of the channel, his son was furiously cursing Minos.
"Stupid fool, damn you, Minos."
"It's totally dark in here. How am I supposed to find my way out? This whole place is enormous, and it leads to nowhere. I don't understand any of this,"
said Jamie.
"Answer me, Minos. Answer me."
"I will answer you,"
cracked the voice of James Pendleton I, and Jamie's body sprung into a million goosebumps. His hands began to shake uncontrollably.
"You've attempted to tread into places that are none of your concern."
Jamie was too petrified to even move, and he was poignantly aware that his father had no scruples and would go to any lengths to sustain himself and his financial empire. It only confirmed his deep-seated hatred, and he wanted more than ever to complete his task at the plant, to unseat his father, dislodge him from power. Jamie began waving his arms in the darkness, not sure if he was traveling in circles and desperately looking for a way out, because, as he ultimately realized, it was one life against another, his father against him.
"You, Jamie, are a poison to my system. You always have been. And I will remove that poison once and for all."
Jamie hurled the walkie-talkie to the floor and it smashed into useless bits of plastic somewhere. He ran but was lost and confused in a dark room without end. Panic, however, was getting him nowhere, and he stopped, standing in the emptiness. Almost directly above him he could hear a gentle hum advancing toward him quickly. It must have been the electronic movement of an elevator. As a crack appeared in the darkness, he could hear the hum, like an elevator stopping only a few yards away from him. He knew what that meant, but he had nowhere to run. He was backed into a corner in a room without end. The bright light hit his eyes with a sudden sharpness. The elder Pendleton, in a brown business suit, stood inside the lighted car. He had a gun that was pointed directly at Jamie.
"Oh, aren't you looking well, Father, considering it's been 14 years?
He had a cold, hard realization of being killed, and he was ready to accept his fate. His father stepped forward, keeping the gun pointed at his son. He pushed a button on the side door, and the lights of the room came on with a full intensity. Squinting, Jamie could sense the true dimensions of the area. The ceiling was just a few feet above him, and its tiles were painted a brilliant red, extending in all directions as far as he could see. The blue metallic elevator shaft was the only interruption in the space. To the right of the elevator, he could see the duct entrance and the baffle plate. The aluminum grid lay on the floor to his right. He understood now how he had gotten down to this area, but he was at a loss as to exactly where he had fallen. He kept the revolver trained on Jamie.
"I am never one to pass aside something that could be of value. What makes you think that I can be of value to you?"
asked Jamie as he felt the tension ease for a second and took a step toward his father's loaded gun.
"You have done your homework. I could never take that from you, Jamie. You're industrious and have done well on your own accord. I commend you for it. But I also realize that I have put my own interest over what you wanted.
Jamie's mind flashed back to their final confrontation. All the indisputable words and divergent interests, the sharp jabs to his father's head, and the immense hatred that would never go away.
I'm not sure I'm hearing you correctly. You are. Now get in the elevator, he said, waving the gun. At least I lived to hear you admit you were wrong, he said as he walked toward the car. Now your conscience is clear, isn't it, Father?
His father followed him into the elevator, shutting off the lights to the room and quickly closing the door. Then he pushed the button marked Terminex, and the car started to rise. But just for a second, before it came to a gentle stop, his father looked his son squarely in the eye prior to opening the door.
My conscience would be clear regardless of what I have done to you. You no doubt have some idea of what I'm about to show you. I'm sure you know the theories perhaps better than I. But let me just say, this is a grand design, a revolution that once perfected will change the world. And your pocketbook, and my pocketbook. I'm no hypocrite, Jamie. The power invites me and I grasp for it.
Jamie nodded his head.
You always said what you thought. I guess I never had to guess where you stood on any issue.
His father pushed the button and the door slowly slid open. Another intense barrage of light wavered from all edges of the visible spectrum, and it blasted into the tiny car. Jamie looked to his right at first, covering his eyes. As he became acclimated to the light, he was dumbfounded by what he saw, and followed his father from the elevator. Just as the room below extended in all directions, so did this limitless space of swirling light around a circular platform his father called the Terminex. The Terminex was surrounded by an outer guardrail supported by thin plastic connections. Inside the rails were the controlling apparatus of the universal power plant. The consoles formed a broken triangle within the platform's circle, and the elevator was in the center of it all. As they walked into the control section, Jamie, as he looked at the magnitude of it all, could not help think he was in the center of an infinite ocean of light, and the Terminex was merely a tiny boat within that sea.
This area of space, this vast area of limitless space,
began Jamie as he rotated 360 degrees around with his mouth open.
This area is where time and space are warped, am I correct?
Yes, more aptly called the Amenti region.
The controls are here, obviously, but the actual instruments must reach under the river and the valley itself,
said Jamie, walking over to the guardrail and gazing outward.
Thousands of miles of circuits and field cores are embedded top and bottom of this carved-out space.
Under the Terminex, but above the subroom, were hundreds of green pipes curved upward to needle-like points about 50 yards from the platform.
The Osiris converters are just converters. They take the Tulip particles and other forms of energy. Yes, I know. They convert them to usable electricity. That is exactly right.
The two of them stood like tiny insects in the wake of an unbelievable dimension.
I have invested my entire fortune on this endeavor. It's a rather meager price to pay as compared to the potential profits. And you're using the system right now?
Asked the much impressed Jamie.
And there are no hitches. That's hardly true,
said his father, lowering the gun slightly. This was the first normal conversation he had ever had with Jamie in close to 20 years.
We have had many problems. For instance, the converters were malfunctioning just last month, pushing out too much electricity into the system. The town blacked out for 5 hours. We put out an official report saying that one of the dynamos had shorted. We had to short one out just because they investigated. And you fooled the inspectors, of course. Of course. We have had problems. Perhaps our biggest headache has been in the NU regions. That's still not totally resolved. I'm not familiar with those regions,
confessed Jamie as he kept his eyes on the gun.
Neowumber regions, NU for short. These are the overlap regions, unpredictable. We can warp the space, but the space overlaps with our own space. And you don't know where that space is, if I'm correct. Could be anywhere in the universe. Yes, that is correct.
These regions extend geometrically around the valley for almost 5 miles. For example, 50 feet outside this plant, a ring approximately 10 feet wide extends around the plant. When we turn on the Osiris converters, which get this thing going, the space will overlap for short periods of time. Subsequently, 500 feet out, there's another region or ring. Then 5,000 feet out, and so on and so forth. We must take care of this problem because people have reported seeing things, he said as the gun was almost by his side now. And you think I could be of importance to you? Jamie, said Pendleton with choked emotion as he gestured with his hands. You can see that this is no experiment by a mad scientist. I told you I have invested everything in this, and I've kept it secret. We can do so much good and benefit ourselves, of course. Join me in that effort. Work with us. Use your God-given talents to work with us. I'm not competent in that area of science, and you know it. And I certainly don't think you are. Running this plant is taking a larger risk than the people of this town would ever accept. You've made the decision for them. We are not running full-time, only from midnight to 4 a.m. And just how many people are working on this project, Father? Right now, what are their backgrounds? Minos, of course, heads the project. Dr. Amenti was his mentor. I met Minos, and he never mentioned any of this. Minos is more than competent. He has 12 assistants and 27 subordinate workers. Hardly a team of scrutinizers. I'd be glad to work with you, Father, if I am gratified that you would. If you brought in a team of government personnel to review every aspect of this operation here. Never, cried his father as he turned sour. I will not do it. They would shut this place down. Too much risk. Risk is the name of the game, my friend. I'm amazed, Father, shouted Jamie, his face growing red, how easily you personally take over the public responsibility for your so-called risk of this operation. Who appointed you to make that decision? Tell me that. Who? The free enterprise system, that's who. It's always worked in the past. Ingenuity and invention must not be stymied by the regulators and the bleeding hearts. Jamie turned toward the Amenti regions as if he were going to ponder the past few minutes of conversation. His father probably thought he had almost won over his son, faced the controls, and gritted his teeth. Jamie saw an opening now and swung his arm against the back of his father's neck. His father collapsed to the floor and the gun slid toward the elevators. Wasting no time, Jamie ran back toward the elevator, picking up the revolver as he raced by. He pushed the button to open the doors. Surely they would be waiting for his father upstairs, so he cocked the gun as he entered the car. He was unsure of what his course of action would be. There were a number of levels on the elevator panel. Rashly, he pushed the one above the Terminex as the door closed and he looked across the platform at the sprawled body of his father. He shook his head, blaming his father for his latest misfortune. The doors closed and the elevator rose, away from the Terminex. The gun was ready to fire at the slightest touch, and Jamie was prepared to use it in order to make his escape from the plant. The car rose for 15 or 20 seconds and the doors opened to a similar room. This room, however, had a blue ceiling and some equipment stored around its almost endless interior. He wondered why the lights were already turned on as he ran from the elevator. To his shock, the elevator doors were closed. His father must have struggled to his feet and summoned the elevator. He would have no chance of escape now. They would be looking for him and he would be trapped in this room with no exit. The duct grid. If he could get back inside the ducts, he might just evade them and get to the car. Instinctively, he stepped back and ran for the grid, running a few feet up the side of the shaft and catching the aluminum panel. He pushed his weight outward and ripped the grid from the side of the shaft. Hurrying back, he rushed the shaft again, this time running up the side and pulling himself into the duct. The duct was dipped at a similar angle to the one that ran below. He put his body lengthwise and pressed his fingertips against the metal. It was a slow process, but the duct, because of its proximity to the central duct, soon leveled off. Jamie nuzzled his way along the tube like a frightened hamster. This duct met the central duct about 30 feet ahead, and he pushed his way through the baffle plate, standing up inside the larger duct. He pulled out his blueprints from his pocket. 49, 57, 13, 62, 34. These ducts were the most difficult to locate amidst the thousands of intertwining heating passages. He traced his former route and then found his place. The ladder was about 50 feet to the rear, and it would be a hefty climb. But he had no choice, and he ran to the end of the duct, looking up 500 feet toward the upper duct. He grasped the rung and began to climb. He was very high up when he heard footsteps in the duct below. His eyes were trained on the lower baffle plate, but no one appeared. Perhaps they figured he wouldn't be able to climb the ladder, or maybe they'd appeared any second and start chasing him. His arms ached as he climbed the distance and lifted the baffle plate. Sweating profusely again, he rolled over into the larger duct. He was more than halfway out of the plant now as he ran back along the duct, holding the gun outward, but they must have been onto him. 5 men appeared up ahead and his eyes opened wide. Shots rang out, and blood erupted from the shoulder of his white turtleneck, throwing him to the floor. But he rose instantly. His instinct for survival dampened the temporary pain in his shoulder. Strangely, it was not like the pain he had imagined for being shot. It ached like a persistent bone bruise. He had no time, however, to contemplate semantics and leap through a side baffle plate, ducking from view as more shots echoed throughout the main duct. Hunching over, Jamie lumbered down the side duct, cutting into duct after duct in order to evade his pursuers. The dull ache in Jamie's shoulder was beginning to sting, growing more intense as he ran. As he looked at the blood-stained blueprints, he could see exactly where he was in the system, but he had no intention of showing up at the computer terminal. He checked out the duct numbers for duct number 17, which led directly to the warehouse. It was not far away, and he pushed his way through the baffle plates. This duct was not any larger. Crunching his way through, he could see the grid plate some 50 feet ahead, and when he reached it, he paused. The other room of the warehouse and the stairs leading to the offices were visible through the aluminum grid squares. His father would be to his left, and the car and his freedom to his right. He kicked out the grid and put his feet over the edge of the opening. It was 15 feet to the floor, and his shoulder was pulsating in pain, but he had no alternative. Pushing himself over, he fell into the air, impacting against the cement. He sprang to his feet, his ankle bruised, and he limped toward the car. His father had been outwitted, he thought, as he crossed the warehouse. Ahead of him was the door just yards away, and he could make it to the outside world with the information he had gained from the plant. His father would be shut down once and for all. He held his shoulder, making his way up to the door switch, and he pounded the door furiously. The door cranked upward, and he could feel victory within his grasp as the cold air rushed into the plant. The 5 men, who he had encountered in the ducts, rounded the corner of the adjacent room. Behind them was his father, Minos, and 2 associates. Jamie froze, just for a second, as he saw his father's countenance. A volley of shots thundered across the warehouse, all missing Jamie, but splintering the walls to his rear. He fired back, and the men dropped to their knees as he raced for the car. A new round of bullets whizzed through the air. This time they hit their intended target. Jamie was thrust back against the green car, and his hip erupted in blood. In less than a second, his entire right side of his jaw was blown away from his face. His teeth, all surrounded by blood, hung in a mass of distorted flesh. Somehow he had stayed on his feet, but his mind was not functioning properly. He knew he had to get to the car, and he ripped the door open, falling onto the seat. They must have been convinced that he was done. They stood up from their kneeling positions. Jamie, bleeding in torrents from his mouth and hip, turned the key and the car started. He quickly threw it into reverse and spun backward from the plant. The men turned toward his father, and he heard his father shout out, "Shoot the damn fool!" he screamed, but Jamie's car was already outside the building. It hit the edge of the chain-link fence at the far end of the parking lot. With all his strength, he pulled himself upward as the men emptied their guns once again. The shots were wild because the car was in the shadows. Jamie put the car into drive and hunched over the steering wheel and fishtailed around the lot. As he neared the open gates, the men reached the warehouse doorway and let loose for a third time. The thin-gauge steel of the rental car became punctured as if it were cardboard. A pellet of lead blasted through the rear window, followed by several more blasts. Then the window was blown away. Jamie's neck became filled with
bits of broken glass, but they couldn't stop him. He had gotten away. I'm shot, he mumbled over and over and over as the car rolled down toward the bridge, but he had escaped. But his fate was far from promising. His riddled body hunched over, and blood pulsed from the open wounds. The bench seat was warm with moist blood, and he could feel his clothing sticking to the velour fabric. In the same car he had been singing songs with his children just hours before. He flirted at the edge of consciousness, just strong enough to keep the car going forward, but too weak to assure himself he could even control it. The icy river was just below him now, as well as the banks of the river road back toward town. Any second he could go careening over the incline and it would be all over. Ahead, the clock tower face was a fuzzy white glow, and its precise measurement of time meant nothing to him now. His eyelids were heavy and his face mangled, like a remnant of its former pristine shape. Turning the corner, the car skidded, and the rear quarter hit the telephone pole. He stepped on the accelerator, miraculously getting back on the road. The center of town and Weissman's apartment was just ahead. "Help me! Help me!" he yelled. "Someone help me!" He moaned out loud, wailing in an almost incomprehensible sound, and the loss of blood started him shivering. "God, help me!" he screamed as the car chugged down the final half mile toward the town. My Other Face, Chapter 7. You know nothing. Do you see nothing? Do you remember nothing? I remember. Those are pearls that were his eyes. Are you alive or not? Is there nothing in your head? T.S. Eliot, from The Wasteland. Marta had put the children to bed, and they were sleeping soundly in Weissman's bedroom. She sat with Weissman in the front of a dwindling fire. They were both relaxed and in many ways felt better than they had for years. Over the hours, they had told stories without any inhibitions as the fire burned. All the present difficulties were buried in her mind, and she had even forgotten her anger at Jamie for leaving on his unknown business. "Oh yeah, good old Gordon Ellis. He gets up in front of the entire school assembly," said Weissman. "Gordon is still here? I don't believe it," laughed Marta, her eyes brimming with happiness. "The man was a jerk. He taught French, and if you were good looking or on the sports teams, you got a good grade." "And you probably got an A, didn't you?" smiled Weissman as he raised his brows. "An A for good looking. Hey, Bernardo," she smiled, opening her brown eyes wide as she tapped him on the shoulder. "Now what did he do? He was in front of the assembly." Right, said Weissman, laughing. "Now picture this. Everyone is there. People from the state, all the students, the townspeople, everyone. Ellis is telling everyone how things are going to change, how the new superintendent has a superb background, and how he studied every aspect of the guy's background. He keeps going on and on and on, telling what a great guy this new super is. Brought him in from Kentucky because of his great reputation, great administrator, blah, blah, blah. So he says, without any further ado, I'd like to introduce the man who's going to get things rolling again. Here he is, what's your name now?" "You're kidding," she howled. "He didn't know the guy's name?" "Not only did he not remember it, but he says into the open mic, 'Son of a bitch, I really screwed that one up.' The place was in hysterics. They all started applauding, and Ellis, he has no class at all, comes back and waves at the crowd. Oh my God, that's funny, and so typical, I might add, of this town, Bernie." "Yup, this place is something else," he said as he stared into the embers. "Getting a little chilly in here. I'd be damned if I'm going to go burn that oil." "It is chilly. I'll get my sweater," said Marta as she got up from the floor. "Oh no, I got plenty of wood in the back of the cellar. Paid the guy for it. I'm going to use it. You, he said, taking her by the shoulders, "just sit down here by the sofa. I'll be right back."
I want to hear more about the school, she smiled as he entered the hallway of the second-floor apartment. Okay, I got a story about Ricky Johnson. Remember him? Oh, you mean Goofy Johnson? Yeah, Goofy's the head of the math department. Oh, God, help us, she said as Weissman went into the kitchen and opened the door that led directly to the cellar. Marta leaned back on the sofa, pulling back the curtains from the front window. The moon was directly overhead now and shined across the weathered gravestones and monuments of the cemetery. She looked away, past the church and down at the clock tower. It was almost 11:30. Where in God's name is Jamie, and what is he doing? Why isn't he here? Bernie and I are having such a good time, or maybe it's because he isn't here. Jamie hasn't got Bernie's sense of humor. That could be it. Well, that could be my fault. I don't laugh. I just do my job and complain about things. Tomorrow maybe we can go to the mountains or even go over to the college. Back to the good old days when we had the time, when we laughed, when we went drinking together. Such good times. Jamie changed. He changed so much since then, and so has Bernie. But Bernie has the same outlook. Jamie was courageously bringing the car up along the cemetery fence. He was still laying against the steering wheel, barely conscious and near death. The car moved slowly, not exceeding 5 miles an hour, finally resting at the top of the hill. Jamie looked up at the bright moon as he cut the engine and the car rolled toward the wall of the church. Marta caught sight of the headlights through the curtains. She raised her brows and looked up at the clock tower. She got up and took her time walking down the hallway. She kept a slow pace down the stairs and out to the front porch. But as she stepped into the cold, she could see something was terribly wrong. The headlights shined at an angle toward the church wall, and the haze of a smoky radiator and exhaust fumes floated through the light in deadly silence. Then she stepped back. She saw the bullet punctures in the car and the smashed rear window. She ran from the porch steps with her eyes stuck open. Her mind seemed to shatter like a crushed eggshell as she looked inside the driver's window. The bloodied figure of her husband lay back against the seat, his blown-apart face hanging in front of her. She lifted her hands to her face as the clock began its incessant tolling. She pulled open the door, and Jamie rolled forward from the front seat. Amidst the chiming, he mumbled out almost incoherent words. Universal gradient, universal 12 to 4. He said with his last breath of life, and his face, because of the gaping hole in his jaw, appeared to laugh as he fell against the steering wheel. Marta was out of control now, screaming madly as she backed away from her mutilated husband. She turned and ran hysterically around the side of the house for the cellar windows. "Bernie! Bernie! Help me, Bernie!" she cried as she slipped in the snow and scrambled up toward the window. "Bernie!" she yelled again. She rushed across the snow toward the bulkhead in the moonlight. The clock bells had stopped tolling as Marta, out of control, pounded on the metal. Marta, what the hell's going on out there?" Weissman yelled back as he attempted to unlock the doors. Jamie! What? Where's Jamie? He asked through her screams, but she merely kept calling her husband's name. There's a lock or something on this, Marta. I'm trying to get through here. Wait a minute. It won't budge. I'm going around. Can you hear me, Marta? She didn't answer him directly, but Weissman didn't hesitate. He crossed the cellar and jumped up the stairs that led to the porch. Weissman, who was a few steps up the kitchen staircase, heard the pleas for help. He dropped the wood and crossed the dirt floor to the bulkhead. What the hell's going on out there, Marta? He yelled at her as he attempted to unlock the bulkhead doors. What? Where's Jamie? He asked through her screams, but she merely kept calling her husband's name. There's a lock or something on this, Marta. I'm trying to get through. It's no use. It won't budge. I'm going around. Can you hear me, Marta? She didn't answer him directly, but Weissman didn't hesitate. He crossed the cellar and jumped up the stairs that led to the front porch. As he opened the front door, Marta burst around the side of the house, shrieking uncontrollably. My husband! Where's my husband? What is it, Marta? Asked Weissman as he looked in the front of the house. The street was empty now and all was clear. He held her by the shoulders in order to calm her down. What's going on here, Marta? Dead. Jamie's dead. What do you mean he's dead? Exclaimed Weissman. Where is he? He wanted to know as fear ignited inside his body. Did somebody call you on the phone? There, she said, raising her arm slowly toward the church wall. He was there, she said, turning and weeping into Weissman's chest. I don't see anything out there, said Weissman as it hit him for the first time. Jamie had warned him about her flashes and her deteriorated mental condition. He had almost forgotten that fact during the frivolity upstairs. But there was no evidence of foul play. Weissman also knew that he was still in love with Marta, and those deep feelings clouded anything she might do or say. He's dead. He's dead. They've taken him away. He's dead. I really don't see anything over there, Marta, said Weissman delicately as one of the neighbors opened the window. Is there anything wrong, Bernie? No, I don't think so. Did you see anything outside in the last few minutes, Mrs. Filippo? We were sleeping. Okay, I'm sorry, called Weissman as she shut the window. I saw him pull up in a car right over there, Bernie. He was all shot up, she tried to explain. Weissman realized that no one had seen a car pull up, and there were no visible witnesses, as she claimed that she saw him die before her eyes. Weissman pulled Marta across the road, and she pointed to the exact spot where she had seen the car. He looked under the streetlight, down the church wall, and scoured the moonlit area just for a trace of evidence, but there was nothing. Weissman walked her back and held her tightly. Marta, you have to tell me. I won't ask again. Was this one of your flashes? No, she said, her mind churning like an unoiled engine. It was real. I know what I saw out there. It wasn't a flash. He's dead, Bernie. Okay, we're going inside before the kids wake up. I'm calling Dan Hastings down here right away. Whatever happened out here is going to be known. You believe me, don't you, Bernie? She asked as if she were a little child. Her whole system was becoming traumatized because of this sensational scene she had witnessed in front of the church wall. Yeah, I believe you, said Weissman. He just kept repeating it over and over again within his own mind. And even if he did not logically believe it, his emotions and feelings for her were convincing him that a car had indeed pulled up with her dead husband inside. Where is he? She cried. Will we find his body? Dan will find Jamie, Marta. He'll find Jamie, said Weissman as he led her toward the porch. I want my pills, my Valium, she pleaded as she looked back at the church once again. It had not been a manifestation of her mind. She was convinced of that. Keeping her control was another matter. She clung on to Weissman as he brought her up the stairs. He was willing to believe her story, but in the light of what she had been through, he wondered just how he could convince the skeptical Dan Hastings that she was telling the truth. One of Pendleton's men drove the battered rental car down the river road, following the other men back to the plant. The bullet-laden corpse of Jamie Pendleton moved with every bump in the road as if it were somehow still alive. But like the dead leaves that blew upward in the wind along the river, seemingly lifted aloft by their own motion, he too was curled and dried, and his living body unmistakably dead. Pendleton waited in the upper offices above the warehouse. He was quickly notified by Minos that the car had been brought back inside the plant, that his son was really dead. He was silent for some time, reflecting back on Jamie's decision as they stood near the Amenti regions of the plant. He was silent for some time, reflecting back on Jamie's original decision to defy him. If he had only said yes, he'd be alive right now. But he had stood up to Pendleton like he always did, right to the bitter end. Pendleton puffed on his cigarette, his eyes moistened from what he had ordered that evening. He looked up at the waiting Minos and raised his brows on his wrinkled forehead. Where did you say you found him? He asked, clearing his throat as he spoke. Well, he made it all the way up to Weissman's house, the front, right on the road. Then they saw him? He asked, opening his eyes. No, of course not. Are you sure? Grilled Pendleton. Yes, we're sure. We managed to drive the car away before anyone came out. Pendleton nodded. Despite the cool business exterior, the situation was getting to him. He had just liquidated his son's life. Putting the palm of his hand on his forehead, he tried to gather his thoughts. You have to get rid of the body. It's still possible that somebody saw that car pull up. Shall I bury him in the mountains? Asked Minos. No, Dan Hastings. Maybe a small-time police chief, but he's not an idiot. Can't take the chance that they'll locate the body. I should have decided all this before. Poor judgment on my part. What about the river? We could wade it down in the Amenti region, cried Pendleton as he opened his eyes. And then he repeated himself. The Amenti region. When we turn on the power in 25 minutes, we'll throw the body into the Amenti region. Is that really wise, Mr. Pendleton? What problem could we have, Minos? It's only a matter of seconds, according to the theories. His body will either break up or be transported millions of light years across the universe. Yes, that is correct. If those are your orders. Yes, they are my orders, Minos. Carry them out at once. Yes, sir, but what do we do with the car? It's rented. We'll get somebody to fix it on Monday, and then we'll leave it in Concord. For the meantime, just leave it where it is right now. Pendleton took a few steps forward and puffed on and inhaled on his cigarette. Well, Minos, it's done. We've been dreading this for months, but it's done. We've got to move on now and make this thing work perfectly. After you take care of the body, I want special attention given to resolving the NU region problems. I want no more overlaps. If we clear up that problem, we'll be a full step closer to perfecting the entire concept of universal power. Yes, sir, I will take care of the body. Excuse me, said Minos, as if he were merely taking out the trash, and then he left the office. Pendleton sat alone in the office. He inhaled very deeply on the cigarette and once again thought about what he had done. His son's body would be sucked into the warped portion of the universe, most likely breaking apart as it withered away. This, his human spirit, never to be seen again. Maya the Face, Chapter 8. When my love swears she is made of the truth, I do believe her, though I know she lies. William Shakespeare, Sonnet 138. Marta had taken the Valium and was getting groggy as she lay on Weissman's sofa. Even without the drug, she probably would have drifted out because of exhaustion. Weissman had his downstairs neighbor with Marta just in case he tried anything rash. He had gone below onto the street to wait for Hastings. The blue and white cruiser slowly pulled up from the square and stopped right along the church wall. Hastings, a very tall man, moved his lanky body from the cruiser. He had rough features and greaseback black hair. When he saw Weissman, he smiled. "Hey, Byrne, how you doing, buddy?" he asked as he looked around the road. "What the hell happened out here?" She said she came downstairs. She saw the car all shot up with her husband inside. He had been wounded very badly, and he died right in front of her. She ran around the cellar where I was getting some wood for the fireplace. I met her out front. There was no Jamie, no car, no nothing. Why did you go to meet her out front?" asked Hastings as he went back to the cruiser and turned on the spotlight to the base of the church wall. "Oh, well, the bulkhead was locked. I couldn't get out." "Yeah?" he asked as he came back toward Weissman. "What the hell are they doing back here at all, Byrne? I heard from a number of people that she's a little, nutso." "Well, she's seeing a psychologist." "Ah, so she's been seeing things, has she, huh?" asked Hastings as he pointed his index finger into Weissman's chest. "What have you got to say to that, my friend Byrne?" "What do you want me to say, Dan? This wasn't like her other, well, she calls them flashes. It was protracted, and it wasn't in black and white." "Oh, black and white, yellow, brown," said Hastings as he put his arm around the smaller Weissman. "Bernie, boy, you got one sick puppy in there." "Don't give me that shit, Dan," he said as he broke away from Hastings' grip. "I tell you, she saw it." "And I tell you that Pendleton kid will be back here real soon, and you'll be the laughingstock of the town." "I know I'm not going to be." "What are you saying, Dan?" asked the irritated Weissman. "You're not going to do anything?" "You got it, buddy. You show me the car or the kid's body and I'll come out. Anytime, night or day. If you're going to start calling me for tall stories, then forget it."
Good night, Bernie, he said as he got back on the cruiser. He started up the engine and swung around the tiny street. As he passed Weissman, he waved and headed back toward the center of town. Weissman couldn't believe the arrogance of the man. Not only that, but the fact that Hastings could make such a snap judgment on the whole matter was ridiculous. He hadn't even given Marta the benefit of the doubt, nor did he interview any of the neighbors. The least he could have done, thought Weissman, was to put out a make on Jamie's car. As he turned to go back inside the house, he heard a noise to his right in the moonlit cemetery, and the tall figure of a man dressed in dark clothes came through the wrought iron gates. The town's minister approached. "Hey, Nat, you frightened me coming out of the cemetery like that."
"Oh, I just cut through from the church. Mrs. Hastings just called me and said there was trouble outside the church by your apartment."
Weissman studied the preacher's prodigious black sideburns and glass-like green eyes. Although Weissman was an atheist, he held a genuine respect for the Reverend's work in the town, and usually for his objective opinion. "Yeah, Marta DuPont Pendleton and her husband. They came back to town today. She claims she saw Jamie murdered. Right here. You didn't see anything strange out here, did you, Nat?"
"No, Bernie, I didn't. You know, the officers are behind all those granite stones. You could drop a bomb out there and not go right on working."
"Yeah, right. There were no other witnesses to all this, although I'm going to follow that up."
"What did Dan say?"
asked the Reverend. "That's just it. Dan isn't asking any questions. He's acting like a damned idiot. Claims it was all a manifestation of Marta's mind."
"Some manifestation," he smiled.
"Yeah, I'll say. Marta has some problems, but you just don't imagine things like this. And where is Jamie anyways? He was supposed to have been back here 3 hours ago."
"Where was he going?"
"Ha ha ha. You ask more questions than Hastings, Nat. We ought to put you on as chief. At least we'll get some things done."
"Bernie, there's a man in Concord that I know, a Lieutenant Nichols. Many years ago, Hastings slugged this man in a drunken rage. I know he's been after Hastings since that time. Now, whenever I need something done, and Dan is a little, shall we say, slow, I just mention that I know a certain Lieutenant Nichols."
"Ah, you're very devious, Reverend."
"Not entirely. I do know him through Reverend Thomas in Concord, but I've never had to call on him."
"Well, that's nice to know, Reverend," said Weissman as the Reverend's other question popped back into his mind. "To answer your question, nobody knows just where Jamie was going. He wouldn't tell us, which makes this thing all the worse. If he doesn't come back here pretty soon, I'm going to really start to get worried."
"Well, it's only been a few hours, Bernie. I think he could return safe and sound, right?"
"Yeah, I guess."
"I'd like to see Marta if I could. Maybe I can talk to her and get to the bottom of what she did see out here. I remember the first year I came here, and back in '66. She was beginning her senior year at the college, and, she was always in such control of herself, and I recall her being exceedingly bright."
"It's exactly right. But she was suckered in by her sweet-talking husband. The little rich kid," mumbled Weissman as he was still resentful of Jamie's power over Marta.
"And I thought you and Jamie were best friends."
We are. I'm just not happy about what he's done to her over the years, but that's all academic now. Let's get inside. It's a little too cold out here for my bones." Marta was half awake, lying on the sofa with her head propped up by pillows. The drug was taking its full effect, and her mind was not very alert. She didn't even realize that the Reverend had arrived, and he was hovering over her. It wasn't difficult, even under these conditions, to remember the twinkling green eyes and long sideburns of the Reverend. "Oh, Reverend McAllister, nice to see you," she said slowly, her eyelids extremely heavy.
"Marta,"
he said as he knelt down and held her hand,
"I understand you had a trying night."
If losing my husband is trying, then I had a trying night, she said with a whimper, looking as if she were going to fall asleep at any second due to the drug.
Well, I'm sorry. If there's anything I can do to help you...
Help me find him, Reverend. Dead or alive, find him, and then I can rest, she said as her eyes began to roll.
Well, I'll talk to Hastings first thing in the morning,
he told her, and her eyes came back to normal. I thought he was coming right down here, she said.
He was here, said Weissman, his lips curled in frustration. He's gone back to bed.
What did he say?
She demanded as she fought to stay awake. She kept looking into the blazing fire as she mumbled.
It's getting warm in here. Warm.
I'll take off the extra blankets, said Weissman as she closed her eyes. Hastings was Marta. Are you listening?
She's sleeping, Bernie,
said his neighbor, an older woman who lived in back of the house on the first floor.
Yeah, so she is, said Weissman. Just as well. Would have upset her if I told her about Hastings.
Nat, Mrs. Carr, can I get you any coffee or any tea or anything like that?
I have to be running along, Bernie.
I don't mean to be a pest, but are you sure you didn't see anything out there tonight?
No, I only heard the screaming, and then I saw you out front with her.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for coming up here. I just hope this whole thing isn't some kind of hoax, said Weissman.
So do I, Bernie, she said as she looked down at the sleeping Marta. She's probably just a little confused.
Yeah, well, I hope that's it, said Weissman as he walked over to the door. Thanks again.
Any time, Bernie,
she called as she trotted back down the stairs. Weissman turned back to the hallway as she shut the door. Reverend McAllister came down the hallway with a dubious look on his face. Suppose you'll be running out of here, too.
No, answered the Reverend. Where's that tea you were raving about?
In all the confusion, Weissman had forgotten to call Marta's parents. He and McAllister talked in the tiny kitchen for close to 2 hours, mostly about Weissman's drinking problems. McAllister commended him for standing up to the pressure of the situation. Weissman had convinced himself that his spell of 8 hours without a drink was the beginning of a new era for him. Even though Weissman had failed to call the DuPonts, they had been informed by a third party about what had happened that evening. Albert DuPont, Marta's father, jumped in his station wagon with his wife and son and sped toward Weissman's apartment. Weissman was on his third cup of tea, taking the kettle from the gas burner as DuPont stomped up the stairs and banged on the stairway doors. The kind of school committee we want in this town, Reverend. Now I take the view, said Weissman as the pounding continued. He set the kettle on the stove and rushed over to the door.
Let me in.
Oh, God, it's DuPont, said Weissman as he hit his forehead with his fingers.
I said, open up the door, Weissman.
Weissman undid the chain and opened the deadbolt. Before he could even get the door fully open, the massive DuPont, dressed in his farmer's overalls and a down vest, burst into the hallway. His little wife and stocky son followed behind him like troops after the tank. Mr. DuPont, hey, Mr. DuPont, I'm sorry, apologized Weissman.
You're sorry? Where is my daughter?
She's asleep on the sofa.
And my grandchildren?
Asked his wife with stark white hair. They're in the bedroom. They're all sleeping.
Fine friend you are to them,
interrupted DuPont as they gazed into the bedroom.
All of this happens and you don't even have the respectability to place a phone call to me.
Well, things were confusing and shouted DuPont, waving his hand through the air.
Benjamin, go get the children with your mother. I'll get Marta. Where did you say she was sleeping?
On the living room sofa.
You know,
he said, pointing his finger at Weissman.
If you weren't so heavy on the goddamn booze,
he said, pointing his finger at Weissman.
Jesus.
He stepped forward and caught sight of the Reverend.
Oh, my God, Reverend, I didn't see you standing there.
And would you have spoken differently to Mr. Weissman if you had seen me? Frankly, Mr. DuPont, Bernie has performed most admirably tonight. He was able to calm your daughter when she was hysterical.
Well, yes, of course, I apologize, Mr. Weissman. If I could please get my daughter from the front room.
Weissman's mouth hung open as he observed how Reverend McAllister's presence had transformed the angry man into a true believer. He looked at McAllister before he spoke. Yeah, well, let me get the suitcases. DuPont moved his large frame down the hallway to the front room. He stopped for a few moments as he saw his daughter lying on the sofa. His mind became acutely aware that what she had been through in California, and he, like Hastings, was convinced that the incident outside the apartment was just another in a long line of things that were wrong with her. He could accept that now that she was back in St. Argus. She was his daughter, and he would take her back to his home. He walked over to the sofa and with one quick scoop lifted her up in his powerful arms. She had 2 Valiums. He was afraid they might try and give her something else on top of the Valium.
She what?
Asked DuPont. He quickly remembered the Reverend was still in the kitchen.
I mean, well, just as well. Thank you.
The chief was here earlier.
I am very much aware of that,
he said as he carried Marta down the hallway.
He is the one who called me. I am afraid my daughter has a lot of problems.
But Jamie hasn't come back, and look how late it is, argued Weissman.
He'll be back. Jamie is an honest man and the best thing that ever happened to my daughter.
Weissman rolled his eyes as he passed. All he could think of was that Jamie was the worst thing that ever had happened to Marta. Jamie didn't give a damn about her personal problems or her feelings. Under it all, he was still the little rich boy waiting for what served him best.
I'm sure that Marta will be better in the morning,
said Reverend McAllister.
Yes, I'm sure she will, Reverend, and thank you for coming to help my daughter.
McAllister had done virtually nothing, and he knew it.
Any time, Mr. DuPont.
They brought the suitcases down to DuPont's station wagon and set them on the floor. Marta was placed in the rear with her half-awake children, who quickly went back to sleep. DuPont started the car and pulled away, waving at them as he went down the church hill and back to his farmhouse in the northwestern part of town. Weissman turned to McAllister and put his hands on his hips. What do you have, some kind of magic charm on that guy?
You mean I've converted you?
Hardly.
I only wish,
said McAllister as he gazed at the lights of the station wagon as it crossed the square.
I only wish that DuPont would act as pious in private as he does in public.
Maya the Face, Chapter 9. The souls did from their bodies fly. They fled to bliss or woe. And every soul, it passed me by, like the whiz of my crossbow. The rhyme of the ancient mariner, Samuel Taylor Coleridge. Albert DuPont carried his daughter from the station wagon into his 18th century white farmhouse. He stoically trudged his way up 3 flights of stairs to the unused bedroom on the 3rd floor. As he set her down on the brass bed, her mother came in from behind and tucked her under 5 layers of blankets. "Maybe we should turn up the heat in here," she suggested to her husband.
"I've told you 100 times, Harriet. It isn't needed up here. The heat rises from below. We have to watch our money. The price of oil—"
All right, she said, giving in as her son Ben came bounding up the stairs. Ben was a well-built ex-Marine who prided himself on his physical condition. "Kids are in the guest room," he told them.
"Good,"
said DuPont as he ushered them out of the room and closed the door.
"I'm going to check on them,"
said Harriet DuPont as she went down the narrow stairs to the 2nd floor landing. "She really has problems, Dad," said Ben to his father as they too went down the creaky wooden stairs.
"Well, it certainly doesn't come from my side of the family. I just don't understand it. Girl was brought up right, taught her to do everything right," he said.
Marta slept soundly for a few hours. The drug lost its effect, however, and she partially opened her eyes to the luminous orange dial of the alarm clock. It was past 3 o'clock in the morning, and the emotional experience as well as the residue drug effects left her drained. She was only half awake to the world. She opened her eyes fully. The giant oak branches outside the farm windows
were blowing in the wind like the nimble fingers of a skeletal hand. She sat up, frightened by her own surroundings, and it took a moment to comprehend just where she had been. Home. They brought me home. They brought me back here somehow. The third floor room. The worst room. The coldest. No one ever sleeps up here unless all the relatives come down from Quebec. Away from the rest of the house. Weissman, where the hell is Bernie? And Jamie? Jamie's dead. Oh dear God, Jamie's dead. The bloody car, blown apart. No, 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 he can't really be dead. It's a dream. It must have been a dream. Not Jamie. Not Jamie, he can't be dead. My children, where the hell are my children? Where the hell are my children? She yelled as she pushed her fingers up through her thick hair. Sandra! Mitchell! She called, throwing back the covers and leaping out of the bed. The room's only light was from the moonlight, cast across the wooden floorboards. She ran across the room and thrust open the door. Where are my children? She cried out into the winding wooden staircase, bounding down the stairs and almost slipping past to the second floor landing, screaming loudly as her father and Ben ran from the bedroom. But she passed them and ran directly down the stairs, through the adjacent hallway into the kitchen. Marta! The kids are up here! Shouted Ben as he chased her down the stairs. Marta opened the outside door and ran into the freezing air. Ben did not catch her until she was halfway down the frozen dirt drive, clutching onto the door of the station wagon and still screaming. My children! She bellowed as he grabbed her, but she kept struggling, unaware that he was even her brother. Marta, it's all right, said Ben. No, they must be dead, like Jamie. Where are they? Where's Jamie? Marta, listen to me. It's Ben. Benny, is it you? Is it really you? She said, and then she began to weep on his shoulder. Oh, Benny, they've killed Jamie. Marta, the kids are sleeping on the second floor bedroom. Everything's going to be all right now. You're home with us. Benny, help me, Benny. I'm right here. Let's get back in the house, he said slowly. He led her over the ice and back toward the kitchen door. Her father abruptly opened the door at the last second before they reached the threshold. Come on, let's not heat the outside, he said as the two came back in the kitchen. Going back upstairs now, Marta, back to bed. Everything will be all right in the morning. Daddy, she asked, her eyes moist as she hugged her father. The elder DuPont, who refrained from bodily contact, stood rigidly as she hugged him. What the hell are you doing running outside like that? Dad, exclaimed Ben, pulling her back. Can't you see she's upset? He shouted back at his father. That is no excuse for behavior like that, blasted her father as Ben led her out of the room and into the hallway. He's yelling at me again, she cried as they began climbing the stairway. Never mind him. I'm with you now, Marta. Going upstairs. Upstairs to bed, she said, babbling like a little child. Upstairs to bed. Be a good girl, Marta. It's past your bedtime. Say your prayers and brush your teeth. Do all the good things that little girls must do. He pulled her head next to his shoulder as he felt the tears in her eyes. She was so helpless now, rambling, as if she had lost her mind. He had to protect her like he had been taught to do. He's dead, you know, Marta continued. I can't believe this is happening. Jamie's dead, you know. Dead, she said as they made it to the second floor landing and her mother emerged from the children's bedroom on the right. She raised her hands to her mouth as her vociferous daughter was brought by her. Marta was so confused she failed to see her mother's image in the dim light. They walked on by, turning up the narrower staircase to the third floor bedroom. You're a good brother, Benny. My brother will help me find him. What did they do to him, Benny? We'll find him, Marta. We'll find him. The air grew colder as they marched around the wooden staircase and through the open door. Ben reached over and turned on the light switch, and the room assumed a different dimension. There were no mysteries, no hidden shadows, no unknown things. Once again, she got into bed and pulled the heavy blankets over her. Her eyes were still moist, and their doubts remained. You're a good boy, Ben, she mumbled, half smiling as he kissed her forehead. He turned on the radio on the end table and twisted it to the late-night rock station, stopping at the sound of a mellow, smooth-talking disc jockey. His demeanor was just what Marta needed right now.
FM 92, Manchester Concord, with the world's softest music for your late-night listening pleasure. WPJD offers you, the listener, 15 minutes of uninterrupted commercial-free music. Pleasant, soft music. Relax and enjoy. FM 92,
said the announcer, who sounded more like a hypnotist. I'll be right downstairs, Marta, if you need anything, right in the bedroom. She nodded as the soft music began to play on the radio. Marta watched Ben move toward the door and shut off the light switch. The light remained inside her eyes for a moment as he gently closed the door. Outside, Albert DuPont stood next to the first step. Well, lock the goddamn door, he whispered to Ben. Lock the door? What if she has to get out? Just my point, said the larger man as he moved by his son. Now, I don't believe this, said Ben as he let his father go by and locked the door to the room. You're unbelievable, you know that? What do you think she's gonna do? You listen to me, Benjamin. That girl up there is crazy. That girl is your daughter, he replied, for the first time raising his voice above a whisper. And there's nothing wrong with her that a little relaxation and counseling won't clear up, he said as he followed his father down the stairs. Counseling nothing, said his father as they reached the landing. She needs to be sent away. You're the one who's nuts, shouted Ben. That isn't how you deal with emotional problems. If you go crazy, you get locked away. That's what I was taught, and that's the rule I'll follow. Well, she'll never be locked up, not as long as I'm around to stop it. We'll see about that, said his father as he moved toward his son. You don't frighten me. You used to, but not anymore. I could level you with one swift boot to your face, so just leave me alone and leave Marta alone, he yelled as he went into the bedroom and slammed the door. They're yelling downstairs. Because of me, they're yelling. He hates me. I know he hates me. And she does too. Benny will help me. Benny will help me. She pulled the covers up to her eyes and crunched her body in a fetal position underneath for added warmth. They could yell all they wanted, but she was determined to ignore it all now. And she was going to put Jamie's death out of her mind. Rest was the only thing that could help her now, whether or not she really had seen him dead. Maybe it was just a flash in her mind. She closed her eyes and tried to sleep. It was a futile effort. Too much was brewing inside of her. Even the soft music was not helping, and she opened her eyes, staring at the ever-moving oak branches. Their shadows swept across the moonlit floor. Perhaps Jamie wasn't dead, she thought, as the indistinct shapes danced around the room, taking on added dimensions to her tortured mind. Maybe she would wake in the morning and Jamie would be down there, downstairs in the kitchen, having pancakes and coffee. All would be fine and dandy, and they could begin their vacation. It would be the best vacation ever, and they would return to California with a new sense of purpose, new dreams that would sustain them through the rest of their lives. The soft music played on and on. Everyone was now sleeping and dreaming, and Jamie was alive and well. It was a waiting game now, to stay awake without fear until the morning light burst through the window. She knew she was not going to sleep. The problems were unsolved, and she sensed her own insanity. That left her to gaze around the room. Pulling the covers up to her chin, she could see the half-visible pieces of furniture and the ornate swirls of her uncle's framed oil painting. It was a nighttime world in which she could imagine 1,000 different things. But something had changed. She was sure that she saw something change. She sat up in bed and her brown eyes opened wide as the tree outside stopped shaking in the wind. The moonlight seemed to be growing brighter, assuming a dingy yellow appearance across the floor. As afraid as she was, she pulled the covers back and got out of the bed. Something was outside and she had no idea what it could be. She edged her way to the window as the light grew brighter. Shielding her eyes, she moved up against the glass and looked across the yard, and then toward town, past the barren apple orchards. This was the key to answer her mystery. It was something she had never seen before. Hundreds of intense, pea-sized balls of light were encompassing the yard. It was as if their full intensity was even brighter, and some kind of screen like smoked glass was hiding their potential brightness. Although each of the balls of light were moving individually, the entire mass seemed to be swirling like a poisonous gas floating across an open field. The moonlight was subordinate now to this drifting mass as it headed toward the house. She backed away from the window, unable to piece together what was occurring in the yard, and the room became cold, colder than she could have imagined, and she shivered as the mass neared the house. Her mouth became dry and tight, as this unknown force seemed to be taking over the room. She kept her chin upward, preparing to run at a moment's notice, but she was stuck. Every muscle in her body was locked. She screamed as loudly as possible, but no sound came out of her parched throat, and she thought her stomach was going to rip apart with fear.
This isn't real, Marta. It can't be real. You're out of your mind. That's good. That's real good. Better to be crazy than to have this be real. It can't harm you. It just is not real.
Tiny pea-shaped balls floated outside the window. She could see them vividly. And to her complete shock, they began moving right through the wall itself. Slowly, as if it were a second-by-second torture of her frayed emotions, they drifted across the room. Her eyes were forced open and she fought to close them, but it was impossible. They were only inches from her now, still appearing as if they were behind a sheet of darkened glass. As far as she could see, they had no mass, but they seemed to stretch downward, upward, and inward. It was truly like nothing she had ever witnessed before in her life. She braced herself as they were going to touch her, but they passed right through her like an X-ray. There was no pain. In fact, there was no feeling at all. They kept advancing, and she endured the barrage for several minutes. The last reflections were still evident as they passed behind her and out of the house, but the cold was so intense that she began to ache. It appeared to be over. They were gone, but she was still held in tow by whatever force they possessed, and she wondered why she hadn't passed out. The moonlight shined through the window again. The silver light became clouded in a deep green hue. Something else was outside, in back of the oak trees. She could see it now, glowing like the eerie green pile rods underwater in a nuclear reactor. And this green cloud, too, was on its way to the house. It seemed to have more of a definite shape, but it was impossible to tell at the distance. Her brown eyes remained open and she was silent. Her mind, however, was running like an uninterrupted ticker tape, shouting and echoing into the depths.
More! There's more! Why is there more? Haven't I endured enough? Haven't I, God? Why are you punishing me? Why did you let me go on like this? Am I in hell? I must have died and gone to hell. God has sent me to hell for being wicked. I am wicked. I am evil. If I have rejoiced because my wealth was great or because I hadn't gotten much, if I looked at the sun when it shone or the moon moving in splendor, and my heart has been secretly enticed, and my mouth has been kissed by my hand, this would also be inequity to be punished by the judges. If I should have been false to God above, if I have rejoiced at the ruin of him who hated me, or exalted when evil overtook him, oh, it's moving this way, coming right down the window. A man's body, a man with light blonde hair. It's his body. Oh dear God, it's his body.
The translucent corpse of Jamie Pendleton moved directly toward Marta, just like the tiny objects. She was held in place as the green haze spread about the room, and his body was suspended within the haze. His forehead was neatly opened as if by a surgeon's knife. Inside his skull, behind the layers of peeled back bone and flesh, was one of the tiny balls of light. His eyes stared intently, even though he was stone cold, dead, and the inner layer glowed through the layers of tissue, producing a paper-thin red iridescence about his iris. His lower jaw still was ripped away from his teeth, and the bloody teeth were hanging in a hideous grin that threatened to melt away the center of her own heart. The bullet-punctured corpse moved forward, drifting lifelessly on a collision course with his very much alive and terrified wife.
This grotesque form was nose to nose with her now, his face flush with hers. She could not stop the advance, nor could she close her eyes from it. Her mind threatened to burst apart as the dead man's face passed right through her. It was followed by the green haze which now hung in the air near the bed. A short time later, all movement came back to her, and she slowly broke the seemingly impossible grip. The body, still in midair, hovered toward the sidewall. As she twisted and turned the knob, she could see the mutilated corpse across the room. She put her back against the door, breathing rapidly as her husband's form passed right through the outside wall and then disappeared. "Get away! Get away!" "Marta! Marta!" cried Ben as he ran up the stairs and unlocked the door. She backed away from the door as he came running inside. He looked around the room for a couple of seconds, ready to defend her. Instead, he was dumbfounded by all the excitement. But Marta was shaking like the oak trees outside and still screaming. "He's dead! He's dead! He came right in through this room, floated through the air, his body all ripped apart like in the car. All the things, those bundles of light, the bundles." Ben could not possibly understand anything she was telling him. He held her and began stroking her hair. He knew that her mind was devastated for whatever reason, and she needed his attention. "What is going on up here now?" asked her father as he came into the room. "Nothing. Go back downstairs," yelled Ben, knowing what his father's reaction would be. "I hear yelling, and your mother hears yelling. What do I tell her? It was a late-night television program?" "Marta had a nightmare, all right?" "No, it's not all right." "It was no nightmare," she cried as she pushed Ben away. "I saw Jamie, and those bundles of light. They came floating through the window and into the room. First the bundles, and then Jamie. They were bright little capsules of light, and he had one of them right in his hand. It glowed out of his eyes, a tiny red glow around the outside of his eyes." "Yeah, sure it did," snapped her father. "I give up. You handle this, Ben. I'm in no mood for clowning around," he added as he went downstairs. "I want to get away. I don't want them to come back. I don't want his dead body to come back," she told Ben, and he moved closer again. Marta, I'm here now. You don't have to worry." "But the bundles, they..." "Listen to me. Listen. I'm going to protect you. I'm right beside you." But she didn't understand. She was still breathing quickly through a constant flow of tears. This unexplainable event had just scared her half to death, and she didn't know how to handle it, nor did she even want to think about it, because it could mean that she was really losing her mind now. Her father certainly thought so. "Am I crazy, Ben?" she asked him. No, you're not crazy," he told her. "You're just a little tired, maybe confused." "Get me out of here, Benny. Out of this room. Just get me out." Okay, we'll go downstairs. Way down, to the kitchen. I'll light the fireplace and we'll have something to eat." "You're a good brother, Benny," she said as he shut off the radio and they went below. Ben held her up most of the way down the stairs. "We're going right into the kitchen," he said, reassuring her. "Nobody believes me. I know nobody believes me," she muttered. Ben brought her into the kitchen and sat her down in the chair in front of the fireplace. He put some wood in the ember bed and started the fire. She began rambling again about her life as he popped some bread into the toaster. "How can I even open my mouth when I say such outrageous things? It's all too crazy. People dying and floating back to life, and bundles of light inside their heads. I knew he'd die. I knew it. You believe me, don't you, Benny?" "I believe you," he said as he blew on the newspaper he had put under the logs. "Even Weissman doubts me. I know he must. And how can you really believe me?" I do, he said as the fire caught on. He moved on his knees and held her hands tightly. "Marta, I do believe you. Now tell me one more time what happened." "I told you already. Bright lights from the outside coming into the room, holding me in place so I couldn't get away." "You didn't tell me that it held you." "Well, it did. It all happened. The bundles came in," she said as the fire began to blaze. "And?" Hundreds of them. And when they got close, it looked like you could see forever into them. I was held. Even after they left, I was held, she said as the toast popped up. But he dared not leave her. Then the smoky green light, and Jamie floating like he was on water or something. You ever seen those bundles before? No. When you did get away, when was it? After he passed by. Her eyelids felt heavy. It's all right now, said Ben as he pulled her down and nestled her on his lap. He stroked her hair as she slowly drifted off in the warm heat of the fiery blaze. And then she was asleep in his arms, needing that simple human touch to help her make it through the long hours of the night. Maya the Face, Chapter 10. At the midnight, in the silence of the sleep time, when you set your fancies free, will they pass to where, by death, fools think, imprisoned? Lo, he lies, who once loved you, whom you love so. Pity me? Epilogue to Asolando, Robert Browning. Dawn had just broken over the sleepy town, but Marta Pendleton was not in any mood to sleep. What little sleep she managed to get the night before was enough to sustain her into the next day. First thing she did was to get to the telephone to call Weissman. He genuinely seemed intrigued by the details of the events in the third-floor bedroom. She stared out the window, watching the sun come up over the New Hampshire mountains as he spoke. A new day had broken, but the same old problems remained. I know what I saw. I was confused when it happened, but I stick by my story. I saw all those things last night, all of them. Okay, as fascinated as I am by this story, what the hell is going on? Unless it was some kind of ghost, she thought out loud. Oh no, there are no ghosts. I don't believe in spirits. Well, I do. Okay, I'm using the life after death logic. You said it was his mortal body. Look, Marta, I'm going to take a walk downtown. I'm going directly over to the station. I'm getting Hastings off his butt. He's going to find out what happened to Jamie once and for all. We'll find him. I'm sick of all this being up in the air. I can call you as soon as I get back. No, I'm going with you, Bernie. I'd advise you to get some rest. You've been through a lot. Let me handle it with Hastings. No, I'm going. I don't need any rest. All I want is the truth. Now, will you pick me up or shall I drive down there myself? Okay, have it your way. Give me 40 minutes. I'll bring you into town. Good enough. I'll be waiting, Bernie. Weissman arrived at the farmhouse a few minutes late, having taken time to remove all remnants of his liquid breakfast from his breath. The pressure had just been too great for him, and he told himself the alcohol was very necessary for him to be able to function at all. He drove his tiny gray Porsche through the college campus into the northern part of town to the farmhouse. Marta was wearing a pair of faded jeans and a puffy winter coat. The smell of Listerine was in the air. What happened to this car? She asked as she sniffed and closed the door. Sorry, it must be my mouthwash, confessed Weissman as he hadn't realized the extent of the odor. He backed the car around and she stared at the white clapboards of the shutterless house, looking briefly at the third-floor window. Right there! It happened right there! Weissman gave a fleeting glance and stepped on the gas. His head was still buzzing from the booze. Just a matter of time here. Matter of time? That's a good one, she remarked as he drove toward the center of town. Marta's heart pounded as Weissman took the shortest way downtown. This route brought him through the college. The buildings were all too familiar, and the memories of the so-called good times were coming back to her. There were no life-threatening problems way back then. Granted, the split with Pendleton was inevitable, and relations with him were constantly bad. The studying was demanding, but all that seemed so easy now. It was easy because it is what they wanted to do. So were the good times. She gazed over the old brick buildings, and she could almost place herself back in 1966 or 67. The quiet walks at night, past the fresh beds of flowers under the maple trees. It was all there before her. The trees were a little larger now, and the flowers were months from pushing through the snow, but it was the same place. And she could not have it. The time had passed. Jamie had become distant.
and now he'd be gone forever. That library brings back memories, said Marta as she looked up its 26 floors. Should have never been built. It's ugly, ugly. But it does bring back the memories. So long ago. We all had so much going for us, she said, and that seemed to hit a raw nerve with Weissman. Did she really know what had happened to him after all these years? Oh, well, I shouldn't harp on those days. Things have really changed. Look at us. Mean I'm stuck here as a two-bit teacher? Blurted Weissman. No, I didn't mean you, Bernie. The great Weissman, who bragged what a fine lawyer he'd be. No, Bernie, I'm the one who just hasn't adjusted. I haven't adjusted as well as you think, said Weissman as he drove onto a wider road that led to the center of town. Consider yourself lucky that you're not like me, for God's sake, she said as they neared the town square. Weissman kept his mouth shut now as he drove right past the clock tower and up to the tiny brown building down the street. The word police was stamped across a white globe atop the pole to the station. He parked his car next to the pole and got out. The streets were nearly deserted on this early Saturday morning, and they walked up to the front door. It was, however, locked tight. Not like Hastings to be late, said Weissman as he looked at his red digital watch. Why, it's almost... The gong of the massive clock tower overhead drowned out his words. What were you saying? 7:30, he said as he looked across the street at the church and searched the square. The rockery occluded the view of the sidewalk in front of the retail shops. In a few seconds, he saw Hastings emerging from behind the rocks, carrying the morning paper under his arm down the sidewalk. There he is, said Marta as she saw him and pointed across the square. Hastings caught sight of them and looked like he wanted to turn around, but it was too late. Civility kept him marching forward. Oh, come on, yelled Marta as she took Weissman's hand and pulled him down the sidewalk. Hastings had just crossed the street as they met him. Marta could see in his eyes he was not happy to see them. Good morning, he said quickly as he stopped. Have you had any luck, Mr. Hastings? She asked as she began walking toward the station. Can't say that I have. You probably haven't looked at all, have you? Asked Weissman. Look for what? What's it to look for? Laughed Hastings as he glanced at the newspaper headlines in order to avoid Weissman. You mean to tell me you haven't looked for my husband? Nope, I haven't, he said as he increased his stride. What about the car, the witnesses? Somebody must have seen him. I'm afraid you're the only one who saw something up in that bedroom, Marta, he said as he stopped and looked her straight in the eye. Why, how do you know that? Who did you talk to? Oh, nobody. It's just that no one has corroborated your story, or they would have called me by now. It's all over town. What the hell is this stupid town paying you for anyways? She shouted as Hastings began to walk again. Marta, Marta, called Weissman as he tried to calm her down. Look, Dan, can't you call the state police or something? I mean, we may have had a possible murder here. You seeing things too, Bernie? Or is it just the DTs? Sneered Hastings as he walked ahead of them. DTs? Who does he think he is saying that to you? Asked Marta. He's a stupid fool. My husband could be dead. He is dead. They watched Hastings come to the door of the station and go inside. Dan can be pretty thick-headed sometimes. Give him a few minutes inside and then I'll go in and I'll talk to him. There's got to be something he can do, whether he believes your story or not. This whole town is getting on my nerves. I knew I shouldn't have come back here. I had a feeling about this place. As much as I have some fond memories, I could sense disaster, and I still have that feeling. Can't spend your life relying on those feelings, said Weissman. Look, Bernie, I knew Jamie was going to die. I had this really deep feeling about it. I've never had a feeling like that in my life, but I had that feeling back in California. Weissman didn't know how to answer her. He didn't believe in her psychic abilities and wanted to change the subject. Let's go over to one of the benches by the rockery, he suggested. That would be a good idea, she replied, nodding her head. He led her across the slushy street and up the frozen path to the benches atop the rocks. The sun, having been up for an hour, was just coming over Weissman's apartment hill, and the fresh sunlight poured over them. You know, said Marta as she brushed the snow off the bench and they sat down, Oh, that's cold. I remember this place in summer, not in the dead of winter. I just look back to those warm summer days, children playing down below, people holding hands, lovers lying on blankets on the grass, and I don't think about the cold, she said as she looked up at the American flag flapping at the top of the flagpole. Yeah, I know what you mean. When the students have gone home for the summer and just the townies are here. I know that feeling. Cars are all ceased to exist and the place is gentle. I can see the sun in the west coming through the green leaves, and I long for those days. But I envy your being in California. I never knew that. Thought this was your ideal place, away from the city, the place you always wanted to be. At least that's what I remember you saying when you were in school. Well, it hasn't been all fun and games for me up here, but I know of no other place I want to go. I like the college atmosphere, but the isolation sometimes gets to me, he said as he very much needed a drink. Can't say I like the wall-to-wall asphalt in California. There must be some other place, a place where there's security and love. I can empathize with you, Marta. I'm afraid our problems are more inside ourselves than any other location. That place, Shangri-La, could be Los Angeles. It could be St. August or anywhere. It could be any of those places depending on what you get out of life. If you just exist without any goals or hope, then any place can be hell. But if you strive and look ahead, the world becomes a different place. I only wish I had those qualities, and I don't. You're drinking again, aren't you? That seemed to shock him, coming from her. He could take Hastings' abuse or the remarks of people from the town, but coming from her, it was as if he let her down. Yeah, he admitted, I've been drinking. I've been drinking for a long time. It keeps me going in this stinking place. Then why don't you leave, Bernie? She asked, putting her hand on his. You can't just destroy yourself. I don't leave St. August for the same reason you went away. Security. That's the real reason. Admit it to yourself, Marta. Security. You don't have to worry about things when they stay the same. You don't have to make any plans. You don't have to adjust. You don't have to grow either, she said as she thought back to her life in California. I feel, Marta, he said as he tightened his mouth, I feel like I haven't moved forward at all. I'm right back in 1966. My beliefs and attitudes, they're all back in 66. I still listen to the same music, read the same kinds of rebellious bullshit, eat the same hamburgers and french fries. I'm stuck. Can't change. It's all too much of the same. Oh, I know the trap so well, Bernardo. I can't cope either. You have the bottle and I have my delusions of reality. You stay here in spite of the world as it changes, and I can't do anything but retreat inward. Last night, Marta, I don't know if I totally believe what you're saying, but I understand. Well, I was just thinking, as I was trying to get to sleep, that incident and you were never a person to deceive yourself. I know that. This is one of the first things I noticed about you way back then. Maybe that's your problem. You can accept the blunt reality of life and then your mind reacts accordingly. I mean, with the flashes, they could be your only escape. But that was the black and white flashes. You say these things you saw last night. I know what I saw last night. I'm willing to admit it may not have been reality. I only know what I know with all my heart, and I believe it to be true. Then we have to go on that assumption, he said diplomatically. That makes a grand total of 2 people against the rest of the world. Not according to Emerson. Oh, and what did Ralph Waldo have to say about people believing in the truth? Emerson said no man thoroughly understands the truth until he's contended against it. Always with the quotes, Bernardo. I say let's contend and see what happens. That's the only way we're going to find out the truth about Jamie. I know the townspeople will speak up against us. Just look at Hastings. If you're right, Marta, then we don't have to worry about what they think. At this point, I don't really care anyways. I just want to get to the truth, she said as she looked up the hill at the entrance to the massive stone church. McAllister was coming out of the large red doors. He walked down the wide granite steps, dressed in his long dark coat and black slacks. Even at that distance, his eyes seemed to penetrate across the square. That's McAllister. I haven't seen him in years. Marty, you talked to him last night.
I must have been out of it. Did he really believe my story? Preachers, they all think they're sympathizing with you. It's their job, smiled Weissman as McAllister made his way across the street. What about old man Pendleton? Asked Marta. Surely he must be upset about this, even if he broke up with Jamie. The old man doesn't care. Above everything else, Jamie is his son. Must mean something to him. I'm getting tired of that idiot Hastings, she said as she visualized the sidewalk conversation with the chief. He's got a lot of nerve. Maybe we should just call Pendleton ourselves. He could get things moving. I don't know. It might be worth a try, but he hates you more than he hates Jamie. I know that. Look, let's go over and talk to Hastings again, all right?
Good morning,
said McAllister as he came up the ice-packed trail to the bench. Good morning, Reverend. I understand you came up to Bernie's apartment last night and talked to me.
I felt an obligation, Marta. You and I were friends long ago.
Yes, long ago. I must say I could have used the Lord last night. Excuse me? Said Weissman, wanting to leave at the mention of anything religious. Hey, Nat, I'll be back in a minute. I'm going over to talk to Chief Hastings about a certain Lieutenant Nichols.
You want me to tag along?
No, I think I can handle him now.
Good. Marta and I will just have a little talk, he said as Weissman scurried down the trail underneath the rockery.
Weissman had a flask in his pocket, and when he reached the cover of the rocks, he pressed it to his lips. Temptation had been too much. He put the flask back in his pocket and walked toward the street as if everything were normal. Reverend, said Marta as she sat on the bench, can God really punish people for things they're not aware of?
God forgives, Marta. He doesn't punish. When something goes wrong in one's life, if sins are committed, then the Lord is ready to forgive. New paths must be charted.
You mean a clean slate?
Yes, if you follow his word, stated McAllister.
What about ghosts, Reverend? I remember when I was in college, you conducted...
Oh, don't remind me. The great seance of 1966. I received a barrage of criticism for that untimely act, except for those who truly wanted to see it. But most people were aghast.
Do you believe in ghosts? She most desperately wanted to know.
Yes, I understand there are unfulfilled spirits who drift aimlessly about, searching for answers. They can be contacted if done properly.
Last night, I saw Jamie's body float through the wall and right through me. McAllister raised his bushy brows and seemed to assume a different character. Making a reference to the supernatural was one thing, contacting it was another, and her revelation frightened him. He looked up at the spire of the church and over toward the graveyard hill as he shook his head.
Marta, sometimes the mind...
I saw it, Reverend. Don't start being like Hastings. I saw it. There's no doubt in my mind.
So you're saying that you're convinced that your husband is dead?
No, I'm saying just the opposite. I want to be sure. I want to know the truth. Then I can rest if he really is dead. Maybe if he's dead, he can be contacted.
I don't know what you mean,
said the Reverend, trying to be evasive. Yes, you do. You know exactly what I mean. I want a seance as soon as possible to find out once and for all what happened last night. If we can somehow find Jamie, then we'll know. That's what's important.
But it's been all these years, and if the townspeople found out,
it would ease my mind. You know the problems I've had. I just want to know one way or the other, whether Jamie's alive or dead.
Well, I need time for preparations.
How much time?
Oh, tomorrow night,
he said, feeling the pressure. That's too long, Reverend. Make it tonight, after everyone has gone to sleep. I don't want any interference, and I'm sure you could keep it hush.
You know, I'm taking a big chance by doing this.
Yes, I know, and I'm grateful.
Very well, make it midnight, but you must tell no one. You must not let this get out, and I will only have my most trusted friends at the house.
I'll bring Weissman.
I doubt it. Weissman doesn't believe in spirits, he said. You remember where my home is located?
On the river road, About a mile from the skating rink, she told him.
Yes, that's right. Good memory,
he said as he rose to his feet, looking as if he had regretted coming down the hill.
And Reverend, we'll know for sure,
she said as she looked up at him with her big brown eyes.
Yes, we will know for sure.
He put his coat collar up and slowly made his way down the path back to the church. Weissman was roaring mad with Hastings. Perhaps it was the booze or maybe his frustration over Marta's condition. In any event, he was tired of Hastings' inaction. Look, Dan, I'm sick of your bullshit. She said she saw it. I don't care about her past, her problems, or whatever. Could have happened. That's the point. It could have happened, and you're treating this like it certainly did not happen.
She's nuts, Byrne. She ought to be sent to the loony bin. I deal in facts,
said Hastings, still reading the newspaper from behind his desk. Then how's this fact? I had the phone number of a certain Lieutenant Nichols on the state...
Nichols? How the hell do you know about Nichols?
Asked Hastings as he looked up from the paper.
Aha!
I struck a nerve, didn't I? Said Weissman. He's right at the barracks up in Concord, just waiting to hear something mean and nasty about his friend in St. August.
Look, Weissman,
he said as he rose and pointed his finger at Weissman.
You can't threaten me.
Oh, no? Asked Weissman as he picked up the receiver and started dialing. 596729.
All right. I know you've been talking to the Reverend about this, and don't you go around telling anyone else about Nichols. Now, if the Reverend wants me to go out and check around the town, then I'll go out. But don't you put the squeeze on me, Bernie. And it's just going to be a waste of time, you know, he said as he grabbed his coat, because she is crazy.
Just get back to me soon, needled Weissman.
I'll get back when I'm good and ready,
snapped Hastings as he exited via the rear door. Lieutenant Nichols, called Weissman with a grin as the door closed. All the exuberance called for a drink. He tipped the flask and looked toward the common. Marta was sitting alone now on the bench above the square. He stuffed the flask back in his coat and hurried out the front door to the station. The bells were ringing 8 times as he walked down the path to the top of the rockery.
What did he say?
Said Marta as he approached. He just went to go look at and ask questions, said Weissman as he did not want to get too close.
How did you manage that, Bernie?
She asked. She could smell the liquor, but was unable to hurt Weissman's feelings by pushing the matter. A little friendly persuasion with the aid of the Reverend.
Really?
She asked as she stood up and wiped the water from her jeans. Yeah, he gave me a number to call in Concord if Hastings gave me any trouble.
Good. The Reverend is performing a seance tonight at his house at midnight. Now we can get to the bottom of all this.
Seance? That's crazy, Marta. It's nonsense. There's just no basis.
Then you'll just have to bear with it.
Me? He snapped as they started walking back toward his car. I'm not going to that seance.
I told him you'd be with me, she pleaded.
Weissman, still having feelings for Marta, could not resist her request.
Oh, all right, it'll make you feel better.
But I doubt it will. Just remember, I think it's all a crock.
Let's see how you feel when it's over.
She smiled and they got back in the car.